Greetings to my dear guests on this video. I wish you a pleasant viewing and look forward to your feedback in the comments. I still clearly remember the moment when everything changed. The office looked exactly the same as before. The same hum of computers, the slight musty smell of printer paper, the morning sun shining in golden rays on my desk. But my perception had changed, because the man standing in front of us was not my boss. It was my former boss's son, who had just inherited the company. "Good morning, everyone," he said, clapping his hands as if he were conducting a motivational training session. "From this moment on, I am the new CEO." This was followed by restrained, hesitant applause. I didn't applaud. Not out of anger, at least not yet, but because I already knew who I was dealing with. I had worked at Hamilton Tech Solutions for 17 years. I had joined the company before his father bought the building. I helped build the infrastructure, wrote the code that ran the company, designed the internal systems, and personally trained every new IT specialist. I wasn't just an employee. I was the foundation of this organization. But to Jason Hamilton, I was just another face in the crowd. An outdated reminder of a time he wanted to erase. His father, Richard Hamilton, was completely different. Richard was conservative, but always fair. He valued loyalty and counted on it. He was far from a technical genius, but he clearly understood the value of those who kept the company running. When his health began to fail, he stepped down and handed over the reins to trustworthy hands. At least, that's how he saw it. I watched Jason walk slowly around the office, as if he were honoring us with his presence. Stylish suit, hair slicked back, jaw clenched, full of self-importance. He needed to prove his worth, and unfortunately, that meant downsizing. "Changes are coming," he said with a tight smile. "Efficiency, optimization, streamlining. The usual. Some of you may not fit into Hamilton Tech's new vision." I felt my colleagues' eyes slide over me. They knew Jason didn't care about me, and it wasn't because of my mistake. On the contrary, during his internship, I noticed one of his disastrous attempts at programming. I prevented a serious crash that he almost caused. I didn't betray him then, although maybe I should have. Later that day, I received a letter in the mail. Meeting at 4 p.m. CEO's office, Jason Hamilton. I didn't lose my composure, not yet. I gathered my materials and walked confidently into the office. He didn't even look up when I opened the door. "Sit down," he said coldly. I sat down. He slammed his laptop shut with satisfaction and leaned back in his chair. "Lisa, you've been here a long time." "Yes, almost 2 decades," I replied calmly. He smirked. 20 whole years. Doing what? Are you still fixing old code and babysitting these systems?" I remained silent. I knew how this would end. He leaned forward, his voice even colder. "I'm not spending a penny on a useless employee." "Are you firing me?" I nodded almost inaudibly, my heart pounding, but my face remained calm. "I understand." Jason blinked, as if expecting me to beg or protest. When I remained silent, he twisted his mouth into a smile again. "At least you have the dignity not to make a scene." I stood up, carefully pushed my chair back, and turned toward the door. "Human Resources will contact you about your severance pay," he added, as if he had just remembered. I froze at the door. "According to your father's contract, severance pay is automatic. But you should review the terms again," I said calmly. He looked after me in confusion, but I didn't wait for a response. I left the office and the entire building. At home, I immediately opened my laptop. There was something Jason didn't know about. When Richard appointed me Chief Systems Architect 3 years ago, he included a very important clause in my contract. The one Jason didn't bother to read. The one that gave me complete control. Control over every internal system, every access point, and all levels of security. And if I were fired without good cause, I had the right to wipe everything off the face of the earth. I'm not vindictive. But Jason's actions weren't just cruel. They were downright stupid. because now he's going to find out just how valuable that useless employee really is. I hardly slept a wink that night, not because I was upset. I'd long since learned not to take corporate betrayals to heart, but I was preparing my next move. Every system, every line of code, and every security protocol I had created over the years was now in my hands. Jason had no idea what he was agreeing to. When Richard promoted me to Chief Systems Architect, I laid out one condition. If I was taking responsibility for all of the company's systems, I needed protection. Richard supported this. He trusted me. He valued my work. So, together with the legal department, we included a clause that few CEOs dare to include. If I was fired without good cause, or if the terms of my severance package were violated, as specified in the contract, I would have the right to revoke all access, strip the administrator of their privileges, and delete the integrations. In other words, wipe the slate clean. This clause was hidden in the emergency section, about halfway through the contract. I doubted that Jason had looked past the title page of the contract. The next morning, I woke up, combed my hair, made coffee, and sat down at my desk with a deep sigh. I opened the remote systems control panel. All critical platforms were still linked to my account. Jason hadn't even reassigned access rights. Human resources never got in touch. No exit interview, no formal handover. It seemed like he really thought I would just quietly disappear. I moved the cursor to the emergency lock tab and clicked. A chain reaction began. The employee portal blocked access to payroll, the internal messenger was locked, and the CRM and customer databases were taken offline. The servers remained on, but their functions were severely limited. I watched as the company's lifelines went down one by one. I didn't delete anything. That would have been illegal. But under my contract, I had the right to suspend access until the dispute was resolved. It was an extreme nuclear option, intended for use in the event of a disaster, and it worked perfectly. By noon, my phone vibrated. First an unknown number, then again, and then a message from Mark, a senior IT analyst I hadn't spoken to in months. "The system is crashing. Did you do something?" Jason was apparently losing control. I didn't answer. A couple of minutes later, the receptionist called, and I missed that too. Finally, Jason himself called. I glanced at the screen and, keeping my cool, said, "Lisa's on! What's going on?" He roared, not hiding his panic. "What have you done to our system?" "I acted strictly according to the contract," I replied evenly. "You should read it," he shouted. "I didn't delete the data," I explained. "I just revoked access. There's a huge difference between the two." "You're out of your mind," he growled. "No, Jason, I was ready," I said calmly. "You made a decision without understanding the consequences. That's on your conscience," he yelled, pacing around the room. I could hear his footsteps and his confused voice. He didn't understand that getting fired wasn't just a matter of crossing his name off a list. "How can I get everything back?" he asked, his voice growing quieter. "You don't need to get anything back," I said. "You're not authorized to make any changes." There was a long pause. Then he asked quietly, "What do you want?" I could have demanded substantial compensation or a public apology, but this wasn't about revenge. "I want you to admit your mistake," I replied. "Publicly, in front of the team, the board of directors, and everyone who saw you destroy a company you weren't ready to lead." He laughed bitterly. "Are you serious?" I just smiled to myself and said, "You have no choice." Then I hung up. I spent the rest of the day responding to messages from former colleagues. Some were shocked, some quietly supported me. They had sensed trouble from the moment Jason took the reins, but didn't know what would happen next. 2 days later, chaos engulfed Hamilton Tech like a forest fire. Salaries weren't being paid, customer accounts were inaccessible, customer support couldn't respond to tickets, and even the office coffee machine was malfunctioning because it was running on the same cloud admin panel I had designed. On the third morning, I received a text message from an unknown number. The board of directors is holding an emergency meeting. Jason is in big trouble. The name wasn't signed, but I knew it was Mark or someone from accounting, those whom I had earned more trust than Jason ever had. I returned to my freelance work, my clients, and my peace of mind. But I couldn't help following the news and corporate rumors. It was no longer just about justice. It was a spectacle of the house of arrogance coming crashing down. Later that day, a call came in from a private number. "Miss Carter? This is Diane Hart from the board of directors. We need to talk to you." Her voice was clear but polite, the voice of someone used to being in control. "When?" I asked. "As soon as possible." "Within the hour, if you're available." I joined the video call wearing a black jacket and the same hairstyle I had worn for the quarterly reports. 6 board members sat behind massive redwood desks, and in the center of the screen was a haggard Jason with his collar open and his eyes red. "Lisa," Diana began, "we are aware of the glitch in our systems." "Yes," I confirmed calmly. "I was the architect of those systems for the past 6 years. And your contract gave you the right to suspend access in the event of wrongful termination?" she clarified. "Yes," I nodded. "One of the conditions is dismissal without severance pay?" "Exactly." Jason wanted to object, but remained silent. "Were you offered severance pay?" Diana asked. "No," I replied. "Jason said I was useless, and they wouldn't spend a penny on me." A tense silence hung in the room, and several people exchanged glances. Diana turned to Jason. "Is that true?" He cleared his throat. "I didn't read the contract completely. I thought it was a template." I raised an eyebrow. "That's not true." Diana sighed. "So, to be clear, the data is safe, but access is restricted?" "That's right," I confirmed. "No losses. I followed protocol." "What do you need to get reinstated?" I paused. "Official acknowledgement of wrongful termination, a letter revoking my dismissal, and a public apology from Mr. Hamilton." Jason turned sharply to the camera. "Are you serious?" "Extremely serious," I replied. "You fired me without cause, without severance pay, and without understanding the systems I created. You can't just undo that." Diana paused for a moment, then nodded. "We will consider your terms." "Thank you, Miss Carter," I said, and left the conference call. That evening, I walked under a low, gray sky, where the streetlights shone like halos. For 17 years, I had put my energy, sleepless nights, and all my experience into this company. I had always done my job and never asked for more than I deserved. With one sentence, Jason had rejected all of that. But now he knew what his father had understood from day one. Loyalty must be earned, not inherited. I wasn't out to destroy the company, but I wasn't going to save it at my own expense either. If Jason intended to continue pretending that everything was under control, he would have to watch the whole machine fall apart without me. Jason didn't apologize. Not that day, not the next, not even when key clients started pulling their contracts. I learned from a friend in accounting that he had hired an outside IT firm. They promised to restore access within 72 hours. But they had no idea that I had built the systems like a fortress, not out of revenge, but for security. Hamilton Tech relied on confidential data, legal documents, personnel records, payroll, internal audits, client agreements. When Richard gave me complete autonomy, he also entrusted me with security measures in case of a hack. Ironically, I became the very breach Jason hadn't expected. By the 4th day, the board was under serious pressure. Key suppliers were threatening lawsuits, the finance department couldn't process invoices, and several government contracts requiring enhanced security were on the verge of being canceled. In the evening, the phone rang again, but it wasn't Diana calling. It was Richard, Jason's father, and the company's founder. "Lisa." His voice sounded slower than I remembered, but it was firm. I heard what happened. "Hello, Mr. Hamilton," I replied, smiling in surprise. "I should have contacted you sooner. I've been out of it lately, but Diana kept me informed. I've read everything, including our contract, he continued after a pause and a slight clearing of his throat. I want you to know that I intend to honor its terms. I gave you that authority because you earned it, and now I realize how necessary it was. Thank you, I said quietly. It means more than you know. Are you ready to meet? He asked cautiously. Just the two of us, without Jason's advice or interference. The next day, we met at a quiet cafe outside of town. He looked older and weaker, but his eyes were still sharp. I trusted Jason to handle the case with wisdom, but he let his ego get in the way, he said when we sat down. You were the only person I could rely on to protect what we built, and now you're the only one who can save it. I remained silent, watching him slowly sip his tea, the cup barely trembling in his hands. I'm not asking you to forgive him, he continued. I'm asking you to help fix this for the company and the people who still depend on it. My jaw clenched. He had called me worthless in front of the entire staff and fired me as if I meant nothing to him. If I come back, I said, I want it to mean something. He nodded. I understand, and I think it's time to discuss the terms. A moment later, he slid a document toward me. An official partnership offer. Not just reinstatement, but joint ownership, with permanent rights to the system I had created. Public recognition of my role and full authority to transition to the new management. Where's Jason? I asked, raising an eyebrow. We'll leave together, Richard replied firmly. He doesn't know yet, but after tomorrow's board meeting, everything will be set in motion. I blinked. And who will replace him? He smiled. We'll consider candidates. That night, I carefully read the documents. Everything was fair and transparent, and the contract was watertight. For the first time since leaving the building, I felt at peace. But another decision was looming. The next morning, I stood before the management again, but not as a fired employee or a desperate contractor, but as a person whose value had finally been recognized. Jason was also in the room, his eyes downcast, his shoulders slumped. He was silent. Diana turned to me. Lisa, will you agree to restore the system? I nodded. Yes, on one condition. The entire IT department will receive fair compensation for the hours spent fixing other people's mistakes, and every engineer from my former team will receive a promotion and permanent status. Diana nodded impressively. Agreed. I opened the admin panel, entered a couple of commands, and clicked Run. The lights at Hamilton Tech flashed again, and the rhythm of work returned. I glanced at Jason again, but he didn't meet my gaze, and I didn't need him to. The system was back online. Emails were flowing, salaries had been paid, and customers were returning. On the outside, it looked like the storm had passed, but inside, I was exhausted. 17 years, so many nights, early mornings, and lunches at my desk, fixing other people's mistakes, and supporting a company that never kept its promises. And in an instant, all of that was threatened with being erased by a single sentence. I won't spend a penny on useless employees. Pain quietly crept up inside me. It was no longer about revenge, but about true value, which is so easily ignored. I spent the next week handing over the systems to the new team I had helped to recruit. I didn't want to be the single point of failure. That's what I had been taught. One afternoon, I found myself back in the old server room. The hum of machines, flashing lights, the cool air conditioning. Everything was the same, but now I wasn't there to fix anything. I was there to say goodbye. Mark, my former colleague, quietly found me there. I heard Jason left the office today. Yes, I nodded. It's about time. He didn't even say a word? I don't need his words, I replied. He was silent when it mattered. Mark smiled slightly. You know, we all watched what you did, and we weren't just impressed. We were proud of you. I looked up in surprise. Proud? Yes, you stood up for all of us, for every employee who was underappreciated, for every woman who was told she wasn't capable, You reminded us that a title doesn't equal intelligence. My chest tightened. You gave us back our faith, Lisa, he added. I couldn't respond, only smiled quietly in return. That weekend, I visited my parents' graves. Both teachers, simple people who believed in strength, not ego. When I got the job at Hamilton Tech, they were as happy as if I had won the lottery. When I stayed late, they brought me dinner. When I was passed over for another promotion, they encouraged me to keep going. I sat down between the headstones and rested my hands on the grass. I did it, I whispered. Not just for myself, but for everyone like me, for everyone who was told, "You're not good enough," for every employee who was fired, left with nothing but an empty box and a forced smile, for every invisible genius behind the screen who did the work for everyone else, while someone else took the credit. I stayed there for a while, just breathing, listening to the wind in the trees, and letting the silence envelop me like a blanket. The following Monday, I returned to the company for the last time. Richard invited me not to work, but to an official ceremony. They wanted to express their gratitude to me. I hesitated, but agreed. The entire staff gathered in the atrium. There were speeches, applause, and a few tears. Then Richard stepped forward. He handed me a glass plaque with gold engraving. For 17 years of dedication, brilliance, and impeccable integrity, Lisa Carter. The applause was long, loud, and sincere. But what touched me most was the stream of employees lining up to shake my hand. Young engineers, office administrators, cleaners, managers, people from every department. One recent graduate held my hand longer than the others. "Someday I want to be just like you," she said. I smiled. "Then be better than yourself." That evening, I came home, lit a candle, made some tea, and for the first time in many years, fell asleep without an alarm clock. I knew that everything was fine with the company. More importantly, I knew that everything would be fine with me too. 2 months have passed since I restored Hamilton Tech Systems. Life was back to normal, at least on the surface. The company was running, operations were smooth, and its future was no longer hanging by a thread. But Jason Hamilton disappeared from the tech scene as quickly as he had appeared. Rumors spread instantly. Investors left, clients questioned the management, and the board of directors whispered about failure. The golden boy who once mocked the Redwood desk simply vanished. No new titles, no startups, just a deathly silence. I didn't celebrate out loud or write about it. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. People like Jason destroy themselves. They think power is inherited, not earned, that people are replaceable, that they will never fall until they do. And when they do, it's not the sound of the fall that matters, but the silence that follows. One afternoon, while sipping coffee in my home office, I received an unexpected message. "Hey, it's been a long time. Can I call Jason?" I stared at the screen for a long time. I didn't owe him anything, but curiosity got the better of me, and I replied. His voice was quieter than I remembered, without arrogance, without a smirk, just fatigue. "I'm probably the last person you want to hear this from," he began. "That's right," I said calmly. Pause. "I was wrong," he admitted. I was silent again, letting the silence linger. Let it sting a little. "I didn't understand what you did and how much you put into it. I thought technology was just a tool. That loyalty wasn't necessary." "That's not true," I finally replied. "It never was." "I've lost everything," he said. "Even my father won't answer my calls anymore." "That's between you and him," I said. "It's none of my business." He sighed. "You don't have to forgive me. I just needed to say it." "Then say it," I suggested. He sighed. "I'm sorry, Lisa, for underestimating you, for not reading the contract, and for being disrespectful. You didn't deserve that." I let his words hang there, then replied, "Accepted, but don't confuse that with forgiveness." He nodded and hung up. I closed my eyes and exhaled, not realizing I had been holding my breath, not because of his apology, but because it reminded me of how far I had come. A few weeks later, I stood at the ribbon-cutting ceremony for my company's new office, Carter Systems. There was no luxury, just clean desks, fast computers, and a team of passionate engineers. Some of them were from my old Hamilton team, others were fresh graduates with eager eyes. I gave a short speech. I built my career in the shadows. I was called the employee. I was underestimated and underpaid. But I kept building because I believed in my work, even when others didn't believe in me. I looked around the room. If I've learned anything, it's this. Your value isn't determined by who sees you. It's determined by what you create, how you act, and how you behave when no one is watching. The applause was quiet but sincere, and at that moment I no longer felt tired. I felt a sense of unity. Now I mentor young tech professionals, not just to write code, but to draft contracts, stand up for themselves, say no, and demand respect. Hamilton Tech still exists, but it's different. Richard quietly retired, and Dana became the new CEO. She asked me for advice during the transition period. I told her one thing: take care of your people, and they will take care of the company. It's a lesson that many will never learn, but it changes everything for those who are willing to learn it. As for Jason, the last I heard, he lives in a one-room apartment on the outskirts of town. No one calls him Mr. Hamilton anymore, and his name hardly ever comes up in the tech world. And mine now adorns contracts, bills, systems, and the front door of the company I built from the ground up. Lisa Carter is not a useless employee or a forgotten name, but a creator, a fighter, and a woman who rewrote her own final chapter.